Guardians of the Forgotten. The stars stretched like brilliant pinpricks against the endless void as Captain Alara Voss stood at the panoramic viewport of the Earthship Sentinel. Her weathered face, marked by 20 years of deep space exploration, reflected in the reinforced glass. At 53, she commanded respect not just from her experience, but from the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her tall frame. Captain, we're detecting an anomalous reading at coordinates 227 Mark 43, Lieutenant Marcus Reed announced from his sensor station. The young officer's fingers danced across holographic controls as he refined the scan. It's drifting, minimal power signature, but definitely artificial. Voss turned, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Classification. Unknown, ma'am. It's not matching any registered vessel profiles in our database. Commander Dmitry Volkov, her executive officer, moved to stand beside her. The burly Russian had been her right hand for nearly a decade. Derelict trader, perhaps? This sector has seen pirate activity recently. Voss shook her head. Too far from established routes. She tapped her wrist communicator. Dr. Kapoor to the bridge. Within minutes, the ship's chief xenobiologist arrived. Dr. Navin Kapoor was a slender man with kind eyes and perpetually ink-stained fingers from his habit of taking handwritten notes alongside digital ones. Captain. Voss gestured toward the main display where the sensor readings were now projected. Your assessment. Kapoor studied the readings, then frowned. The hull composition, these radiation signatures. Captain, this has hallmarks of Kryxian technology. A hush fell over the bridge. The Kryxians were a species that had become the boogeyman of galactic politics, a race supposedly driven to extinction 50 years ago after a devastating war with the founding members of the Universal Council. Earth had joined the interstellar community too late to know much beyond propaganda about these so-called monsters. That's impossible, Volkov whispered. The Council reported their complete eradication. Apparently not, Voss replied dryly. Options people. Intelligence officer Javier Ortega, who had been quietly monitoring communications, spoke up. Captain, Council protocol dictates immediate reporting of any Kryxian artifacts or technology. Failure to comply is a Class 1 violation. I'm aware of the protocols, Officer Ortega. Voss turned to her navigation officer. Lieutenant Joe, plot an intercept course. Dr. Kapoor, prepare your first contact kit. Commander Volkov, I want a security team on standby, non-lethal measures only. Captain, Ortega protested, I must formally advise against this course of action. Voss faced him directly. Your objection is noted, Officer Ortega, but we're explorers first, politicians second. If there are survivors aboard that vessel, our humanitarian duty supersedes political considerations. As the Sentinel changed course, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Humanity had been the newest addition to the galactic community, still proving their worth and reliability to species that had been traversing the stars for millennia. This single decision could jeopardize Earth's standing. 3 hours later, the Sentinel had matched velocity with the drifting vessel. Up close, the damage was extensive. Hull breaches sealed with emergency measures, propulsion systems clearly offline, and only minimal life support functioning. Scans indicate 14 life signs, Reed reported, surprise evident in his voice. Weak but stable, they're in some kind of suspended animation. Voss nodded. Dr. Kapoor, Commander Volkov, you're with me. Lieutenant Reed, you have the bridge. The away team boarded the derelict via a sealed docking procedure. The interior of the alien vessel was cold, emergency lighting casting long shadows across curved corridors that seemed designed for beings slightly taller than humans. The air was thin but breathable. Life support is operating at minimal capacity, Dr. Kapoor observed, consulting his handheld scanner. They're diverting almost everything to the stasis chambers. They followed the power signatures to a circular chamber where 14 transparent pods were arranged like spokes on a wheel. Inside each, a tall, slender figure floated in suspension fluid. Their skin was pale blue with faint luminescent patterns that pulsed slowly. Where humans had hair, They possessed fine, translucent filaments that drifted like sea anemones. "My God," whispered Kapoor, "actual living Kryxians." Volkov kept his hand near his sidearm. The most feared species in galactic history. Voss approached one of the pods, studying the being inside. The Kryxians' features were delicate, almost fragile-looking, nothing like the monstrous depictions in Council historical records. "They don't look like the destroyers of worlds to me, Commander." As they examined the stasis technology, Dr. Kapoor made a startling discovery. "Captain, according to these readings, they've been in stasis for nearly 45 years. This isn't a warship, it's a refugee vessel." Voss's communicator chirped urgently. "Captain," Reed's voice came through, tension evident, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Universal Council." "Put it through." The holographic image of Council Representative Thorne appeared before them, a tall, reptilian being with elaborate ceremonial markings on his scales. "Captain Voss, our monitoring systems have detected your contact with a quarantined vessel. You are ordered to withdraw immediately and report to the nearest Council outpost for decontamination and debriefing." Voss straightened. "Representative, this vessel contains survivors in critical condition. We're obligated by both Earth protocols and basic decency to render assistance." Thorne's secondary eyelids flickered, a sign of agitation. "Those beings are Kryxians, Captain. Their entire species was condemned by unanimous Council vote. Contact with them is strictly forbidden." "Condemned for what crime?" Voss challenged. "That information is classified beyond your clearance, Captain. Your orders are clear. Withdraw and report for decontamination. The Council is dispatching enforcers to your location." The communication ended abruptly. Voss looked at the suspended beings, then to her officers. "They'll be here in less than 12 hours, Volkov noted grimly. "If we defy the Council on this, Earth could face sanctions," Ortega added through the communication link. "Possibly even probationary status." Dr. Kapoor was already examining the stasis controls. "Captain, these beings have been fleeing for nearly half a century. If we leave them, the Council will almost certainly terminate them." Voss was silent for a long moment, her ethical training warring with political reality. Finally, she tapped her communicator again. "Lieutenant Joe, prepare for emergency acceleration as soon as we're aboard. Lieutenant Reed, send a message to Earth Command. Have encountered refugee vessel requiring immediate humanitarian assistance, proceeding to Earth with survivors, requesting diplomatic support against potential Council objections." "You're really doing this?" Volkov asked quietly. Voss turned to him, her resolve evident. "Humanity joined the galactic community on our terms, Dmitri. If we abandon our principles at the first test, what was the point?" She gestured toward the stasis pods. "Begin transfer procedures. We're taking them home." As her crew sprang into action, Voss knew she might have just committed her career to the void. But looking at the peaceful faces of the Kryxians, beings who had been running for decades from a punishment they might not deserve, she couldn't find it in herself to regret the decision. The Sentinel's engines powered up as the stasis pods were carefully transferred aboard. Within the hour, they were accelerating away from the derelict, racing against the approaching Council enforcers. "They're broadcasting warnings across all frequencies," Communications Officer Helena Torres reported. "Every vessel in the sector is being advised to intercept us." "Let them try," Voss replied, settling into her command chair. "Plot the fastest course to Earth, maximum sustainable speed." As the Sentinel leapt to FTL, leaving the abandoned Kryxian vessel behind, Voss couldn't help but wonder what truth awaited them. About the Kryxians, about the Council's deception, and about humanity's place in a galaxy that suddenly seemed much more complex and dangerous than they had been led to believe. Far behind them, in the empty corridors of the abandoned refugee ship, a final message played on loop in the Kryxian language. When Dr. Kapoor later translated it, the crew would discover its chilling simplicity. "To whoever finds us, remember we existed. Remember we were innocent. Find the truth." The truth, as Captain Alara Voss would soon discover, would shake the foundations of the galactic order itself. Outcasts among stars, The Sentinel streaked through interstellar space, its enhanced propulsion systems straining against physical limitations. In the medical bay, Dr. Navin Kapoor worked tirelessly, surrounded by the 14 stasis pods containing the Kryxian refugees. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, analyzing their biology and preparing for eventual revival. "You need to rest, Doctor," Captain Voss said, entering the bay with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Kapoor, who accepted it gratefully. "I'm close to understanding their stasis technology," he replied, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "It's remarkable, Captain. Their cellular regeneration capabilities are unlike anything I've seen in any Council species." Voss studied the nearest pod, where a female Kryxian floated peacefully. "Have you determined if they can be safely revived?" "Yes, but I recommend doing so one at a time. Their physiology suggests they're telepathic to some degree. Waking up in an unfamiliar environment might be traumatic." Kapoor pointed to one pod where the occupant appeared slightly older than the others. "This one shows signs of being their leader. I suggest starting with him." Voss nodded. "Proceed, but have Security Chief take the present just as a precaution." An hour later, the pod's fluid drained, and its transparent cover retracted with a soft hiss. The Kryxian's eyes opened slowly, 3 pupils arranged in a triangle pattern within each iris, all a striking silver against the black sclera. He gasped, sitting upright with alarming speed. Security Chief Minori Take tensed, hand hovering near her weapon, but Dr. Kapoor raised a calming hand. "We mean you no harm," Kapoor said softly, engaging the universal translator they'd programmed with linguistic patterns from the refugee ship's database. The Kryxian's gaze darted around the medical bay, taking in the humans, the equipment, and the other stasis pods. His fine, translucent filaments rippled with pulses of blue bioluminescence. "My people, they live." His voice had a melodic quality even through the translator. "Yes," Voss stepped forward. "I'm Captain Alara Voss of the Earth vessel Sentinel. We found your ship drifting and brought you aboard." The Kryxian studied her intently. "Earth, the new species, you know what we are, yet you saved us." Disbelief colored his words. "We know what the Council claims you are," Voss corrected. "I'd prefer to hear your side." The Kryxian was quiet for a moment, then pressed his 3-fingered hand to his chest. "I am Navigator Zyrek, last senior officer of the Kryxian science vessel Luminara." His voice grew heavy. "And we are not the monsters they have made us to be." Over the next 3 days, as the Sentinel continued its race toward Earth, more Kryxians were carefully revived. Their story, pieced together through conversations and data recovered from their vessel, painted a vastly different picture than the Council's official history. In the ship's conference room, Voss assembled her senior staff as Navigator Zyrek projected holographic images from a small device he'd kept within his stasis pod. The Kryxian civilization was primarily scientific and artistic in nature, Zyrek explained. The hologram showed spectacular floating cities with delicate architecture, surrounded by lush biodiversity. "We were one of the first species to achieve interstellar travel over 8,000 years ago. That's millennia before most Council races," Intelligence Officer Ortega noted, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to curiosity. Zyrek nodded. "We explored but did not colonize. Our telepathic nature made us highly empathetic to all living beings." The hologram shifted to show Kryxians working alongside various alien species. "We served as mediators, scientists, and healers across many developing civilizations." "So what changed?" Commander Volkov asked, arms crossed but expression thoughtful. The hologram darkened, showing a strange crystalline structure being excavated. "Approximately 60 years ago, our archaeologists discovered this artifact on our homeworld's 3rd moon. It predated our civilization by millions of years." Dr. Kapoor leaned forward. "What was it?" "A repository of knowledge from what we called the predecessors, a species that seeded much of this galaxy with life before disappearing. The artifact contained genetic records, technological blueprints, and most importantly, star maps to other repositories." Captain Voss's eyes narrowed. And the Council wanted this technology. Yes, when we announced our discovery at the Council Assembly, there was great excitement initially. Zyrex filaments darkened to a deep blue. But when our scientists determined that the repository was genetically locked, responding only to specific DNA sequences, everything changed. The hologram shifted to show Council warships surrounding the Kryxian homeworld. The founding Council races, the Arconian Imperium, the Thrax Collective, and the Dominion, demanded we surrender the artifact. When we refused, citing the predecessor's clear intent that each repository should be accessed only by specifically compatible species, they declared us a threat to galactic security. They attacked without provocation, Tors asked incredulously. They did worse, Zyrek replied softly. They released an engineered pathogen across our entire system, one that targeted our specific biology. Within months, billions of Kryxians perished. His voice trembled. Those of us on deep space missions or outposts survived, but we became hunted. The Council rewrote history, painting us as dangerous extremists who had threatened to unleash ancient weapons. A heavy silence fell over the conference room. The 14 of us were a research team, Zyrek continued. When we learned what had happened, we placed ourselves in stasis, hoping someone would find us, someone who would listen to the truth. Lieutenant Reed, who had been quietly analyzing data on his tablet, looked up sharply. Captain, I've been cross-referencing Navigator Zyrek's account with Earth's initial Council orientation materials. There are deliberate omissions and timeline manipulations in what we were told about galactic history. That doesn't surprise me, Voss replied grimly. Officer Ortega, your assessment. Ortega, the most politically astute of her crew, steepled his fingers. If this is true, Captain, Earth has inadvertently allied itself with perpetrators of genocide. However, without concrete evidence beyond the Kryxians' testimony, the Council will dismiss these claims and potentially sanction Earth for harboring dangerous fugitives. There is evidence, Zyrek interjected. Each repository contains records of the others if we could reach one. He was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Captain, came the voice of Ensign Patricia Ockafer, we're receiving simultaneous transmissions from Earth Command and the Universal Council. Voss exchanged glances with her officers, put them through split screen. The conference room display illuminated with two images. On the left, Admiral Wei Chen of Earth Space Command, his expression grave. On the right, not just Representative Thorne, but the full Council triumvirate representing the founding species. Admiral Chen spoke first. Captain Voss, we've received multiple diplomatic protests regarding your current course of action. The situation has escalated to an emergency session of the Earth Security Council. Before Voss could respond, High Chancellor D-Mix of the Arconian Imperium cut in, her feather-like appendages flaring with obvious agitation. Captain Voss, you have illegally seized quarantined biological entities and are harboring known terrorists. Your actions constitute a severe violation of Council security protocols. With respect, Chancellor, Voss replied evenly. These beings were in a refugee vessel, not a warship. They've been in stasis for nearly 50 years and pose no threat. You are not qualified to make that determination, hissed Director Gron of the Thrax Collective. Earth was admitted to the Council with provisional status. Your species lacks the historical context to understand the danger these creatures represent. Admiral Chen looked increasingly uncomfortable. Captain, I've been ordered to instruct you to rendezvous with the Council enforcement vessel Arbiter. You are to transfer the Kryxians to their custody and submit to a full inquiry. Voss straightened in her chair. Admiral, these beings have provided evidence suggesting the Council's historical account of the Kryxian conflict may be inaccurate. I believe this warrants investigation before any transfer. Evidence? The third triumvirate member, Overseer Lith of the Dominion, leaned forward. What evidence? Navigator Zyrek stepped into view of the transmission. The reaction from the triumvirate was immediate, expressions of shock, followed by thinly veiled hostility. The repository records everything, Zyrek stated calmly. including the Council's deliberations to eradicate our species rather than allow us to access the predecessor knowledge independently. This is precisely why your kind was deemed too dangerous, Chancellor Demix snapped, spreading falsehoods and discord. Admiral Chen looked between the triumvirate and Captain Voss. Captain, this situation is becoming diplomatically untenable. Earth cannot afford to— Cannot afford to what, Admiral? Voss interrupted. Cannot afford to question potential injustice, cannot afford to stand for truth. If that's the case, then perhaps Earth joined the galactic community too hastily. The Admiral's expression hardened. You're overstepping, Captain. On the contrary, I'm doing exactly what Earth explorers have always done, seeking truth beyond established dogma. She turned to the triumvirate. I formally request a full hearing before the General Assembly, with the Kryxian survivors permitted to present their evidence. Denied, all three council leaders said in unison. Admiral Chen sighed. Captain Voss, I'm officially ordering you to comply with the council directive. Any further defiance will be considered insubordination and potentially treason. The transmission ended, leaving the conference room in silence. They're terrified, Dr. Kapoor observed quietly. Not of the Kryxians themselves, but of what they represent, evidence of the Council's past crimes. Voss turned to Zyrek. You mentioned other repositories. Are there any we could reach before the enforcement vessels intercept us? Zyrek hesitated. There is one, in a system your people call Proxima Centauri, but accessing it would require a Kryxian and— He paused, studying Voss intently. A compatible species. Compatible how? Voss asked. The repositories were designed to be accessed by those sharing certain genetic markers with the predecessors. Zyrek's three-pupiled eyes widened. Since finding your vessel, I've observed similarities in your neural patterns that are unusual. They resemble our own in ways that should be impossible for independently evolved species. Dr. Kapoor's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. Captain, I've been analyzing both human and Kryxian DNA. There are unexplainable commonalities, markers that shouldn't exist in species from different star systems. Are you suggesting humans and Kryxians are genetically related? Commander Volkov asked incredulously. Not just related, Zyrek replied. Your species may be the only other living descendants of the predecessors. That would explain why the Council has been so careful in controlling Earth's integration into the galactic community, limiting your access to certain technologies, restricting your deep space exploration. And why they're so alarmed by our contact with you, Voss finished, the pieces falling into place. Officer Torres set course for Proxima Centauri maximum speed. Commander Volkov prepared defensive measures, will likely have company before we arrive. As the crew moved to their stations with renewed purpose, Voss remained in the conference room with Zyrek. The Kryxian studied her with new appreciation. You risk much for beings you just met, he observed. Perhaps, Voss acknowledged. Or perhaps we're simply recognizing a truth the Council has tried to bury, that we're not as alone in this galaxy as we've been led to believe. Outside the viewport, stars streaked by as the Sentinel changed course, racing not just toward Earth's neighboring star, but toward a revelation that could forever alter humanity's understanding of their place in the cosmos. Behind them, in the vast darkness of space, Council vessels changed course to intercept, hunters pursuing not just fugitives, but a truth they had killed billions to conceal. The Sentinel, once merely an exploration vessel, had become something more profound, the last hope for justice for an almost extinguished species, and perhaps the key to unlocking humanity's true heritage among the stars. Heritage of courage. The Proxima Centauri system loomed ahead, its red dwarf star casting a crimson glow across the Sentinel's bridge. Captain Voss stood at the tactical display, reviewing their increasingly precarious situation with her senior staff. 3 Council enforcement vessels closing from the stern, Lieutenant Reed reported. ETA 4 hours, 2 more approaching from the outer system perimeter. They've mobilized the entire sector fleet, Commander Volkov observed grimly. We're being hunted like criminals. Voss's expression remained resolute. Navigator Zyrek, where exactly is this repository located? The Kryxian gestured toward the holographic display of the system. The fourth planet, the one your astronomers named Proxima D, the repository, is hidden beneath the northern polar ice cap. Dr. Kapoor, who had been running continuous analyses on both human and Kryxian DNA, looked up from his workstation. Captain, I've confirmed Zyrek's hypothesis. The genetic markers we share with the Kryxians aren't just similar, they're identical in key regulatory regions. This couldn't have happened through convergent evolution. So humanity and the Kryxians truly are related, Intelligence Officer Ortega mused. That would explain the Council's careful management of Earth's development. And why they so thoroughly erased the Kryxians from history, added Communications Officer Tors. They didn't want us making the connection. Voss turned to Security Chief Takeda. What's the status of our defensive systems? We've rerouted power to strengthen our shields, but we're an exploration vessel, Captain, Takeda replied. We can't outfight 5 Council warships. We don't need to fight them, Voss said. We just need to reach the repository. She activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for atmospheric entry and potential emergency landing procedures. Engineering, I need every ounce of speed you can give us. As the Sentinel accelerated toward the fourth planet, tension gripped the crew. They were no longer just explorers or even rescuers. They had become rebels against the established order of an entire galaxy. Proxima D was a harsh world of ice and stone, swept by constant storms as the gravity of nearby planets tugged at its atmosphere. The Sentinel broke through the thick cloud cover, buffeted by violent winds as it descended toward the northern polar region. Sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures beneath the ice, Reed announced. Matches the patterns from the Kryxian data. Council vessels have entered the system, Tors reported urgently. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, final warnings to stand down. Voss ignored the warnings. Take us in. Find us a landing zone as close as possible to the repository entrance. The ship shuddered as it descended through the turbulent atmosphere. On the view screen, a vast ice field stretched to the horizon, broken only by jagged mountain ranges and deep crevasses. There, Zyrek pointed to a relatively flat expanse. The entrance should be within that glacier formation. As the Sentinel settled onto the ice with a groan of landing struts, the crew sprang into action. Voss led the away team, consisting of herself, Commander Volkov, Dr. Kapoor, Navigator Zyrek, and 2 other Kryxian scientists named Alara and Tezim. Chief Takeda, you have the bridge, Voss ordered as they entered the airlock. If Council ships land, initiate defensive protocols, but avoid direct confrontation if possible. The away team emerged onto the frozen surface, the wind howling around them as they activated their environmental suits. The temperature was well below freezing, and the thin atmosphere necessitated breathing assistance. The Kryxians, despite their seemingly fragile appearance, moved with surprising ease in the harsh conditions. This way, Zyrek called over the comm system, leading them toward a towering wall of blue-white ice. The entrance has likely been covered by millennia of ice formation, but it should still be accessible. As they approached the glacier face, Tezim removed a small device from his pack, a relic salvaged from their refugee ship. The device emitted a pulsing light that seemed to penetrate the ice, revealing what lay beneath. There, Alara pointed to a faint geometric pattern deep within the glacier, the repository entrance. Using focused thermal tools, they began to melt through the ice, creating a tunnel toward the ancient doorway. Above them, the sky flashed with the entry burns of multiple vessels. Council ships are beginning their descent, Volkov reported, checking his tactical display. Estimate 20 minutes until they reach our position. Then we have 19 minutes to find the truth, Voss replied, intensifying her efforts. After what seemed like an eternity of cutting through compacted ice, they broke through to a smooth metallic surface inscribed with flowing symbols that matched those on Zyrek's artifacts. In the center was a circular depression. A genetic scanner, Dr. Kapoor observed. Similar to what you described from your homeworld repository. Zyrek nodded solemnly. It requires a Kryxian to initiate the sequence, but if our theory is correct, a human will be needed to complete the activation. He placed his three-fingered hand into the depression. The ancient symbols illuminated with a soft blue glow, pulsing in rhythmic patterns. The metal surface before them shimmered and then parted, revealing a dark passage leading downward. They descended into what appeared to be a vast chamber, their helmet lights barely penetrating the darkness. As they entered fully, the chamber responded to their presence, lights activating in sequence to reveal a space that defied the harsh world above. The repository was a perfect dome, its interior surface covered in what appeared to be a star map of the galaxy. At the center stood a crystalline structure similar to the one Zyrek had shown them from his homeworld. Remarkable, Dr. Kapoor whispered, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding their precarious situation. This architecture, it's unlike anything in our records. The predecessors built to last eternity, Alara explained. This facility has been waiting dormant for the right beings to return. Zyrek approached the central crystal, which began to glow as he neared. Captain Voss, we need you now. According to the ancient texts, both bloodlines must be present to access the full repository. Voss stepped forward, standing opposite Zyrek at the crystal structure. What do I do? Place your hand here opposite mine. Our combined genetic signatures should. He was interrupted by a thunderous explosion from above. Debris rained down as the chamber shook violently. They've found us, Volkov reported, drawing his weapon. Council forces are breaching the entrance. Voss didn't hesitate. She placed her hand against the crystal surface opposite Zyrek's. Immediately, the entire chamber blazed with light. The star map on the dome's surface came alive, certain systems illuminating more brightly than others. A voice filled the chamber, neither human nor Kryxian, but somehow comprehensible to all present. Genetic signatures recognized. Repository access granted to lineage species Alpha and Omega. Holographic images materialized around them, scenes of an ancient civilization, technically advanced beyond even current council capabilities. The beings shown were neither fully human nor Kryxian, but shared characteristics of both. The predecessors, Alara breathed, our common ancestors. The hologram shifted to show the predecessors seeding various worlds with genetic material, including primordial Earth and the Kryxian homeworld. When facing extinction, we chose to preserve our essence within promising species across the galaxy, the voice explained. You are among our descendants, engineered to eventually recombine knowledge and continue our legacy. More images appeared, star maps, technological schematics, and historical records spanning millions of years. Among these were recordings of the Council founding species' first contact with the Kryxians, their discovery of the repository, and their subsequent conspiracy. They feared what would happen if we accessed this knowledge, Zyrek said softly, not because we would use it as a weapon, but because it would undermine their authority, Voss finished. If other species learned that the Council founders had committed genocide to maintain power. The chamber shook again as more explosions sounded from above. Through the dust and debris, armored figures began to descend, Council enforcement troops led by representatives of the Triumvirate themselves. Step away from the repository, Chancellor Demix ordered, her troops spreading out to surround the away team. This facility is now under Council jurisdiction. Voss turned to face them, standing protectively before the crystal. This repository doesn't belong to the Council. It belongs to all descendants of the predecessors, including humanity and the Kryxians you tried to exterminate. Director Gron of the Thrax stepped forward, mandibles clicking in agitation. Captain Voss, you have no concept of the powers you're interfering with. The knowledge contained here could destabilize the entire galactic order. You mean it could destabilize your control, Dr. Kapoor countered. The repository has already shown us the truth. You destroyed the Kryxians not because they were dangerous, but because they were the first to discover their heritage, a heritage we now know humans share. Overseer Lith raised a weapon. This discussion is pointless. The repository will be sealed and all witnesses eliminated. The Council's stability must be preserved.